September 20, 1943, Kaafjord, northern Norway, 0047 hours. The Arctic night lay over Kaafjord like a sheet of black ice, silent and suffocating, broken only by the faint groan of tidewater pushing against the rocky shoreline as the midget submarine X-6 crept forward through the darkness. Beneath the surface, the freezing water pressed against the hull with crushing force, and the tiny craft's electric motor hummed weakly, its vibration running through the steel tube like the heartbeat of something dying. Inside the cramped hull, Lieutenant Donald Cameron knelt over the periscope well, breath fogging in the frigid air as condensation dripped steadily from the sweating bulkheads. The smell of battery acid, diesel residue, rubber seals, and stape oxygen thickened the air. Every breath felt sharp, metallic, and precious. The six-man crew moved with tense economy, every gesture slow, deliberate, silent. They had already cut through one anti-submarine net, slipped beneath a second, and nearly snagged their sail on a third. And now, after hours of nerve-shredding navigation, they were approaching the final barrier between them and their target, the German battleship Tirpitz, the most feared surface warship in the Northern Hemisphere. Known to the Allies as the Lonely Queen of the North, Tirpitz lay moored beneath cliffs steep enough to cast permanent shadow, her flak crew sleeping above cold steel decks, her hull hidden beneath camouflage netting like the shell of some immense armored creature at rest. The Germans believed no submarine, even a midget one, could reach her. Tonight, under Operation Source, Cameron and his crew intended to prove them wrong by slipping beneath the ship and attaching two massive side charges, explosives powerful enough to rip open her hull and render her unfit for combat for months. But already the approach was failing. The incoming tide was far stronger than expected, grabbing X-6 by the nose and shoving her sideways like a toy, grinding her starboard plating against an unseen rock. The hull screeched in protest, a jagged metallic howl that froze every man in place. "Trim! Trim her up!" Cameron whispered fiercely. Aitken spun the valves, shifting seawater through the ballast tanks. The submarine lurched, steadied, then lurched again as the current continued to shove. The batteries groaned under the strain. The insulation smelled hot, too hot. One short circuit and they would lose propulsion entirely, left to drift helplessly in a fjord patrolled by Germans who would show no mercy to the saboteurs who came to kill their prized battleship. Cameron lowered the periscope a fraction and wiped away fog with his sleeve. Through the smeared lens, he could see the faintest outline of the final anti-torpedo net ahead, dark vertical lines rising toward the surface like bars of a prison gate. Beyond it lay Tirpitz herself, her bow pointed north, her stern secured to the fjord wall, her guns angled upward even at rest, her armored hull a monolith of steel. Cameron felt his throat tighten. He knew every contour of that warship from reconnaissance photos. He knew where her magazines were buried beneath layers of armor. He knew exactly where he had to place the charges. But he also knew something else. No one had ever gotten this far before, and the fjord felt wrong tonight. Too quiet, too still, too watchful. He exhaled slowly, then froze. Through the periscope, just for a second, something moved on the far cliffside, a shape, a silhouette, human-sized, but too still. Standing on a ledge no sentry should be posted on at this hour, watching the fjord, watching the darkness, watching them. Cameron blinked, heart slamming once against his ribs. The silhouette didn't turn, didn't light a cigarette, didn't shift weight. It simply stood, black against the darker cliff, impossible to read, but unmistakably present. He lifted the periscope again, hands trembling. But the ledge was empty, clean, silent, as if no one had been there at all. "Sir?" Aitken whispered, noticing Cameron's sudden stillness. Cameron forced his voice steady. "Nothing," he murmured. "Just shadows." But he didn't believe it. Not for a second. Something had been there. Something or someone who should not be anywhere near this fjord at this hour. Cameron drew a slow breath, forcing his mind back to the mission. "Take us forward," he whispered. "1 knot, quiet as death." X-6 nudged ahead, slipping toward the final net. Its steel bars loomed like the ribs of a giant creature buried in the water. Beyond them, under the claw-like cliffs, lay the sleeping behemoth they had come to cripple. But as Cameron guided the midget sub forward, a cold realization spread through him, one far different from the fear of mines or nets or German guns. Something else was awake in the fjord tonight. Something that had already seen them coming. September 20th, 1943. Kaafjord, northern Norway, 0203 hours. The midget submarine X-6 slid past the final anti-torpedo net with a grinding jolt that sent a ripple of panic through the 6 men sealed inside, the hull scraping metal against metal with a shriek so sharp it pierced the thick, stale air. Lieutenant Donald Cameron clenched the periscope handles and froze, heart hammering, waiting for floodlights to snap on or depth charges to roll overboard. But the fjord above remained black and silent, the only sound the distant drip of melting ice sliding down the cliff walls. The scrape faded. No alarms, no engines, no reaction at all. Too easy, far too easy. Cameron lowered the periscope and exchanged a tense glance with his diver, Seaman Fraser, who mouthed a single word without sound: "Lucky." But Cameron didn't believe in luck. Not here, not this deep, not this close to the most heavily defended warship in Europe. The fjord felt wrong, like something unseen watched them from the darkness. He had caught that silhouette earlier, standing impossibly still on a cliff ledge where no guard post existed. And now, slipping beneath Tirpitz's outer barrier without a stir, felt less like fortune and more like the calm between 2 pulses of something waiting to close in. The electric motor sputtered with a high whine, too loud. "Keep her steady," Cameron whispered. "Minimal throttle." Aitken nursed the controls, sweat trickling down his temples despite the freezing air. The smell of overheated insulation crept into the cramped compartment, mixing with the acid tang of the battery fumes. X-6 dipped as the tide pulled her downward. Fraser scrambled to adjust trim. They rose, dipped again. "Tide's pulling us off course," he muttered. And then, thunk! A violent shudder slammed down the length of the hull. Darkness flickered. Tools rattled. Someone cursed under their breath. They had hit something. Not a rock, not the fjord wall. Something metallic, suspended in the water. Cameron jerked the periscope up a few inches and spun it slowly. Beneath them, in the ghostly fuzz of the low-light lens, hung a massive chain anchored to a concrete block, part of the Tirpitz's underwater defenses. Chains, nets, steel barriers like the ribs of a trapped leviathan. No current should have pushed them into that, but the tide here behaved like something alive. Fraser steadied the sub as the hull scraped along the chain with a groan like a wounded animal. Aitken hissed, "Sir, we'll crack the casing if this keeps up." Cameron bit down hard. "Back us off, slowly." They reversed. The chain slid past the starboard side, inches from tearing open their fragile hull. The crew exhaled in a shaky unison. X-6 cleared the chain and crept forward again. The fjord grew darker, so dark that the men felt like they were sinking into ink. Above them, unseen but close enough to feel, the colossal bulk of Tirpitz stretched across the water like a sleeping iron mountain. Cameron eased the sub upward. The periscope broke the surface for a second. A second was all he needed. Tirpitz filled his view. Camouflage nets sagging over her decks, 15-inch guns pointing skyward, smaller AA positions manned by silhouettes moving softly under dim red lamps. A monster at rest, a giant breathing in its sleep. Fraser whispered, "God, she's enormous." Cameron lowered the scope at once. "Charges ready?" "Aye, sir." 2 enormous explosive saddle charges were strapped to X-6's sides, each powerful enough to tear open a battleship's belly. They had to plant them directly beneath the magazines. No margin for error, no time for second attempts, and no hope of escape once discovered. Then, a sound. A faint metallic ping, not from inside the sub, not from the hull, from outside, from the water, like someone tapping something gently. The crew froze. "Mine?" Fraser whispered. "Anchor chain?" Aitken murmured. Cameron shook his head slowly. "No, that's something else." The ping echoed again, closer, more deliberate, as if something moved beneath the Tirpitz, brushing against the water in a pattern that almost resembled footsteps. A chill crawled up Cameron's spine. He raised the periscope a fraction. Nothing, only black water, barely rippling. Yet he felt it, the same sensation he'd felt earlier when the silhouette watched from the cliff, the sense of eyes on them. Something in the fjord that was not German, not friendly, not natural. Watching, waiting. He lowered the scope. "We go in now," he said suddenly. "Full commitment, no turning back." He didn't say why. Didn't say he felt the fjord tightening around them. Didn't say the darkness above seemed to shift. "Prepare the charges." X-6 surged forward, her motor straining. They slipped beneath Tirpitz's shadow, the darkness growing so complete it felt like burial. Then, another problem. A massive underwater boom, one of the Tirpitz's anti-torpedo protection beams, blocked the final approach. It stretched across the fjord floor like a fallen bridge. Cameron cursed under his breath. If the sub hit it, they were done. They had one option: ride over it. "Ballast, 20% positive," Cameron ordered. "Bring us up, slow." The boat rose, wobbled, stalled halfway over the beam. The keel scraped metal. The motor groaned. The batteries hissed. The entire sub shook violently, threatening to roll. "Push her!" Cameron yelled. Aitken coaxed the motor. The beam scraped under them with a terrifying metallic shriek, far louder than anything they'd triggered so far. If the Germans heard that. Light. Just a faint shimmer through the periscope. Cameron jerked his head to the lens. On the fjord surface, high above, a dim glow flickered, like the reflection of a lantern. No German would be using a lantern at this hour. No ship searchlight matched that color. And then, he saw it. The silhouette again. Standing on the deck of Tirpitz, but not moving with the crew. Not wearing a German uniform. Just standing, facing directly toward the spot where X-6 lurked underwater, as if it could see them through 30 feet of black seawater. Cameron felt ice in his chest. "Sir?" Fraser whispered. Cameron forced the periscope down. "Charges first," he whispered sharply. "Whatever that is, we finish the mission before it finishes us." X-6 slid the final meters beneath Tirpitz's belly. The battleship's steel underbelly loomed overhead, like the hull of a leviathan. Cameron steadied his breath. "Release port charge, now!" Fraser hit the mechanism. A heavy clunk reverberated through the sub as the charge detached and sank gently to the anchoring point. "Starboard charge, now!" Another clunk. The explosives were in place, nestled beneath the German giant's magazines. Timer fuses ticking. Cameron exhaled, cold sweat running down his temples. Mission success, if they could escape. But then, the periscope rattled violently. The hull shook. X-6 tilted. Something massive moved above them. Something that wasn't Tirpitz repositioning guns. Something shifting in the water itself. Cameron's blood turned to ice. The fjord felt alive. He whispered, barely audibly, "Get us out." The motor whined. The sub turned toward the exit channel. Then, through the periscope tube, he heard it again. Soft, rhythmic, deliberate, like someone pacing directly over their hull. He dared raise the scope one more time. The silhouette stood there, on the edge of the Tirpitz's shadow, staring down into the water. And as X-6 drifted away, he saw the figure step backward and vanish into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. Cameron swallowed hard. "All ahead," he whispered, "before it comes back." And in the black, breathless silence of Kaafjord, the midget submarine slipped into the dark, unaware that the true danger wasn't behind them. It was following. September 20th, 1943. Kaafjord, northern Norway, 05:12 hours. The freezing black of Kaafjord trembled with distant thunder as X-6 limped blindly toward the outer channel, her hull battered, her batteries dying, and her crew fighting to stay conscious in the oxygen-starved air. Behind them, somewhere under the vast shadow of the cliffs, the two massive charges they had placed beneath Tirpitz ticked relentlessly toward detonation. The midget submarine groaned with every movement, the pressure hull flexing like an exhausted lung as the tide pushed her sideways again and again. Lieutenant Donald Cameron knelt at the periscope, hands numb, throat tight, vision tunneling from fatigue. Every muscle in his body screamed for air. The crew gasped in staggered breaths, pale faces slick with sweat in the freezing cold. Yet none dared rest. Not yet. Not until they were farther from the German giant whose death throes would shake the entire fjord. "Motor's losing torque," Aitken rasped, voice barely audible. "She'll give out in minutes." Cameron nodded weakly. "Keep her moving. Even half a knot gets us farther from the blast." He lifted the periscope an inch, terrified of breaking the surface, terrified of not doing it. The lens rose, showing only darkness. Fjord walls like jagged black teeth, water like ink. No searchlights, no patrol boats, no movement at all. Too still, too quiet, too watched. He lowered the scope sharply, heart thudding, because he had seen it again, on the cliff to starboard, in the same place as before, a silhouette standing just above the fog layer, unmoving, impossible, watching X-6 creep through the black water like it had been waiting hours for their return. But it vanished again the moment he blinked. Cameron squeezed his eyes shut. Hallucination, carbon dioxide sickness, hypoxia, had to be, but the chill creeping up his ribs told him otherwise. "Sir," Fraser whispered. His voice shook. "Did you see it again?" "No," Cameron lied. "Eyes on your station." A faint metallic ping echoed through the hull, much closer this time. Not sonar, not depth charges. Something tapping the outer plating, something moving in the water around them. The crew froze. Then, boom! A thunderous explosion ripped through the fjord, a rolling underwater roar that hit the sub like a hammer from below. Tirpitz's magazines had gone. The entire hull of X-6 jolted upward, shuddering as if grabbed by a giant fist. Lights flickered, tools crashed. A pipe burst above Cameron's head, spraying freezing brine across his face. "Charge is detonated," Fraser shouted. "We got her! God, we got her!" For a heartbeat, just one, relief washed through the claustrophobic capsule. They had done it. The Royal Navy had finally struck the unstrikable. But their celebration lasted 2 seconds because a second shockwave slammed through them. Closer, sharper, wrong. Not from the charges. Something else, something moving beneath them. The sub heeled violently starboard. Aitken screamed as he was thrown across the controls. Battery sparked. The motor coughed, stuttered, then died with a final choking whine. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Crushing. X-6 drifted in total darkness, slowly sinking, slowly turning. "We've lost propulsion," Aitken whispered, voice breaking. "We're dead in the water." The temperature plummeted. Frost crept across the metal walls. Oxygen grew thin, bitter, metallic. Cameron tried to speak, but his voice stuck, because he could hear it now, through the hull. Soft, rhythmic, deliberate. Something moving in the water outside. Something circling them, like footsteps on a steel deck. But they were underwater, 40 feet down. No diver could do that, no swimmer, no machine. "Sir," Fraser whispered. His voice shook. "It's outside." Another scrape, slow, long, gentle, like fingertips dragging along the hull. Cameron's skin crawled. "All hands quiet," he whispered. "No movement." The crew held their breath. The scraping stopped. Only the drip of condensation remained. Then, a face appeared at the viewport. Cameron's heart stopped. Just a blur of pale features, human-shaped, too human, eyes open, expression blank, pressed against the glass for half a second, then gone. "Jesus," Aitken choked. "Sir, what was that?" "No one look," Cameron snapped. "Eyes on your station." A faint metallic ping echoed through the hull, much closer this time. Not sonar, not depth charges. Something tapping the outer plating, something moving in the water around them. The crew froze. Then, nothing. The water around them went still, completely still, as if whatever had been outside had simply drifted away. Minutes passed, 10, 20. The air grew thin. The crew's eyes glazed. Cameron finally whispered, "We have to surface, even if they take us prisoner." Aitken nodded weakly. "Blow ballast." The sub rose, slowly, painfully. The periscope kissed the air. Cameron raised it. A German patrol boat swept the water, searchlight cutting arcs across the fjord. No sign of the figure. No sign of anything except smoke from the crippled Tirpitz drifting like a wounded ghost across the water. Cameron exhaled shakily. "Surface!" The sub breached. Germans shouted. Rifles aimed. Floodlights blinded them. The crew surrendered. They climbed onto the cold metal deck, hands raised, lungs burning for fresh air. As he was forced down onto the planks of the patrol boat, Cameron glanced back toward the cliffs, toward the ledge, toward the place where the silhouette had stood. And there, just for a moment, he saw it again, still, watching, as if it had followed him to the surface, as if it had watched the entire mission, from the fjord mouth to the charges to the surrender, as if it had been waiting for him. German boots shoved him forward. The vision vanished. Cameron stared at the empty rock face, heart numb. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "What are you?" The wind did not answer. The fjord did not answer. The figure did not return. But Cameron knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that X-6 had not been alone under Tirpitz that night. Something else had moved through the black water with them, something older than the war, something that watched men wage it, and something he prayed he would never see again.